blunt about it. Rare has been the election when the vice presidential choice has actually helped the Democratic campaign. But rarer still has been the election when both vice presidential choices have actually helped the Democratic campaign. It is a given that they should have Tim Walz make 10 speeches a week, every warehouse, farmhouse, henhouse, outhouse, and doghouse. But Democrats should also now anonymously flood the Trump campaign and every Republican in the country with a succinct and anonymous message. Send more JD Vance. My God, is this guy an idiot? More accurately, JV Vance. JV. What a gift. JV Vance has launched 20 years after the original attempt to do this succeeded against John Kerry. J.D. Vance has launched a new Swiftboat campaign against a man, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, who served in the military for 24 years. And Tim Walz is the victim here, obviously, but moreover, J.D. Vance has launched this campaign, this swift boating effort, while being the running mate of a draft dodger. If there is one topic you do not want to bring up as Trump's campaign slowly bleeds to death, one topic you do not want to insert into the national dialogue right now, it's stolen valor. And if that were not enough, if it were not enough to bring the entirety of the Trump bone spurs draft avoidance, and that's the best interpretation of it, story back to life after literally 55 years. If there's one thing you don't want to do besides that, it's to bring up this story again and this question of valor and who's telling the truth about their military record when your own role in the United States military was as a Marine correspondent. Captain J.V. Vance was a correspondent with the Marines in Iraq. Brian Williams in uniform, everybody. More on that presently. He's trying to swiftboat to smear a man who served in the National Guard from 1981 through 2005 and who retired at one rank lower than he actually served at because he had not finished one training course. So he took the benefits hit rather than try to fudge the promotion. That is who is being attacked here by J.D. Vance. Thus, JV reopens the entire question not only of what Trump was not doing in Vietnam, but what he, Vance, was not doing in Iraq as a Marine correspondent. And of course, the last phrase you would ever want to use under these circumstances would be the one that goes, stolen valor.
He has not spent a day in a combat zone. What bothers me about Tim Walz is the stolen valor garbage. Do not pretend to be something that you're not. And if he wants to criticize me for getting an Ivy League education, I'm proud of the fact that my mamaw supported me, that I was able to make something of myself. I'd be ashamed if I was him and I lied about my military service like he did.
Stolen valor. Said by a man who was in Iraq as a correspondent. Now, look, I'm not going to go and use that phrase stolen valor against J.V. Vance, because if you go to Iraq as a correspondent, as a innocent bystander, as a member of a peace group, somehow embedded with the Marines, you still stood an excellent chance of getting your arm blown off on a good day. It required heroism, and it certainly counts as military service. I'm not doing what J.V. Vance is trying to do to Tim Walz. On the other hand, as it points out in his biography, he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps and served in Iraq as a combat correspondent for 6 months late in 2005. Part of the, I swear to God, part of the 2nd Marine Aircraft Wing Public Affairs section. I presume they had battles with Iraqi PR people. He said his service taught him how to live like an adult, but he added, Oh my goodness, get this tattooed. I was lucky to escape any real fighting. That's a Marine talking. I was lucky to escape any real fighting, but this guy over here is guilty of stolen valor. Not only that, but Vance has tried to pin the Iraq war on Joe Biden because as a senator, President Biden voted and was conned by Colin Powell and everybody in the DOJ and everybody in the Bush administration and in the Office of Homeland Security and Dick Cheney and all the other scumbags. He was conned, as many of us were. I wasn't, but I'll be part of that era in news for all time. He was conned, as Biden now says, but J.D. Vance wants to make the Iraq war Biden's fault, not Bush's fault. As late as 2010, J.D. Vance was publicly supporting Bush's war in Iraq. Now he says he fell for George W. Bush's propaganda about Iraq. Wait a minute. That was propaganda? That was lying about Iraq? And you were what again? What did you serve as? You were a general? Oh, no, you were a public affairs colonel, J.D. Vance. You were in charge of spreading propaganda. So this war that was based on lies and propaganda by George W. Bush, you were one of the people who perpetrated the lying. Well, we want to give you full credit for that. Thank you for your service, liar. Brian Williams in a uniform. Yes, I personally captured Saddam Hussein. He was staying in my basement. In my penthouse in the middle of the desert near Saddam City. Now, Vance does not have to take all of the blame on this. If you are familiar with the original Swiftboat story, one of the scumbags in charge of the Swiftboating of John Kerry, in which the campaign of George W. Bush in 2004 managed to get MSNBC, CNN, NBC, CBS, ABC, all of them, to question the exact details of where the boat was and where John Kerry was and where the island was when they gave John Kerry one of his medals while he was serving in battle in Vietnam, and they tried to make him look like he was some sort of draft dodger, when, of course, Donald Trump was a draft dodger, and George W. Bush avoided active service, never left Texas for his military service. They managed to do this with the complicity of the media, and a few of us in the back going, I don't think this is right. It was par for the course for the Bush era. And as we know now, Public Affairs Colonel J.D. Vance was helping on this whole Bush measure from Iraq. But that would be in 2005. This is 2004. One of the Bush administration's Swiftboaters was Rick LaCivita, and Rick LaCivita is now senior something or another, senior asshole on the Trump campaign. So they worked on this in 2004. It worked so well, and they've decided to use it again. And they've stepped on their own dicks again because they are emphasizing the fact that Donald Trump dodged the draft and the phony war of Iraq. All of the lies, all of the propaganda from George W. Bush was sold, in part, by Public Affairs Colonel J.D. Vance. The gift that keeps on giving. But wait, there's more from JV. He's offered to debate Kamala Harris. If you've ever heard the cliche too clever by half and wondered what it actually meant, this is too clever by half. He's playing dumb. He doesn't have to play very hard to give this impression across to anybody, but he is playing dumb and claiming that, well, officially, Kamala Harris is still the vice president. I will debate her. They don't really have a vice president. It's been certified already. He also stalked the vice president's plane yesterday, adding to the weird creep factor, leading also to a tweet from Congressman Moskowitz saying he's been on Air Force Two, the vice president's plane, and it has a very nice sofa. This guy is just tone deaf and is another one of the Dunning-Kruger group. No earthly clue that he's not the smartest guy in the room when he's probably seventh from the bottom. The takeaway, the headline to the entirety of the Tim Walz era, just starting day 3, but the headline, the point is he's happy. People like happy. Voters like happy. Voters are fed up with these angry conspiracy theorists, these whiners like Trump and Vance. If there's anything that the Kamala Harris campaign, exploding out of the gates and now exploding again out of the gates with the addition of Walz, has shown, it's that we don't want everybody to be angry all the time. And again, you put on the list of the people who are angry all the time, I'm on that list. I get the point. So here, like we don't have enough here from JV Vance, he went and got more angry yesterday. He got a gift from the Almighty. You want evidence that there might be a God? J.D. Vance got a gift from that entity, if he really exists, yesterday. A reporter asks him, what makes you happy? I mean, utterly teed up to make inroads, to be able to push back against Tim Walz, to stop the bleeding before it turns into a hemorrhage, to compete with Walz for the I like America. I'm happy. What makes me happy? I like dogs and cats. I like ice cream. I like America. I like to smile at the flag. I like to wrap myself in the flag. I like Donald Trump. Donald Trump makes me happy. Say something like that. He couldn't. He couldn't do it. He couldn't stop himself. What makes you happy, he's asked? He answers, in effect, I like being mad. He did everything except say, I'm only happy when it rains. I only smile in the dark. My only comfort is the night gone black. I didn't accidentally tell you that. I'm only happy when it rains.
A little bit different here. You've been criticized as being a little too serious, maybe angry sometimes. What makes you smile? What makes you happy?
Well, I smile at a lot of things, including bogus questions from the media, man. I mean, look, I think if you watch a full speech that I give, I actually am having a good time out here and I'm enjoying this. But look, sometimes you got to take the good with the bad. And right now I am angry.
JV, if you want something to really be unhappy about, the first Vance versus Happy Tim Walz polling will be coming out soon. Meanwhile, his boss, Mr. Stolen Valor of 1966, 1967, and 1968, three-peat winner of Mr. Stolen Valor of the Year, Draft Dodger Don, he stepped on his own wang yesterday, too. The standard Trump, anybody who opposes me is a communist stream, merged with the, you thought January 6th was bad? What about when the entire country burned to the ground by Black Lives Matter, especially Minneapolis? These two streams merged. Trump did it. Trump has spent the entirety of the time since Tim Walz was given the vice presidential slot on the Harris campaign, blaming Tim Walz and Tim Walz alone for communism, inflation, gas prices, the trouble Trump has keeping his hair just the right color of orange. He's been complaining about Tim Walz and insisting it's Tim Walz, and Tim Walz did a terrible job, and he's going to, in that phrase from Stephen Miller, turn the entirety of the Midwest into Mogadishu, except now it turns out, thank you ABC News, Trump got on the blower with all the governors in the middle of 2020, late in the spring, after Trump had tweeted, "Liberate Minnesota," jeopardizing Tim Walz's life by doing so. After all that, after the rioting, such as it was, trivial compared to January 6th, got on the phone with a bunch of governors to talk about how he thought Walz was doing with the protests in Minnesota, and Donald Trump could not stop praising Governor Tim Walz.
I know Governor Walz is on the phone, and we spoke, and I fully agree with the way he handled it the last couple of days. I asked him to do that. The best example, I alluded to it a couple of seconds ago, is Minneapolis. 2 days, 3 days later, I spoke to the governor. The governor is, I think, on the call, and he's an excellent guy.
By the way, the police station in Minneapolis that was burned, that you will hear a lot about as they continue this thread, as they continue to throw anything they can think of against the wall, and so far they have not even hit the wall yet. One of the people who burned it to the ground was a MAGA provocateur, a member of the Boogaloo Boys. So when you hear, oh, they burned down a Minneapolis police station while Tim Walz was governor, just remember, like the guy who shot at Trump, it was MAGA. And you could just take some of that tape of Trump and you could say, we're Tim Walz and Kamala Harris, and we approve this message because Donald Trump is an effing moron. Now your polls roundup, and again, the overarching theme of the polls ever since Harris replaced Biden in this campaign has been the same message. These are the kind of inroads that were hoped for by perhaps Labor Day or maybe October 1st. They are already here, and there is as yet no indication they are even slowing down. YouGov for The Economist yesterday. Harris, 45. Trump, 43. Data for Progress, Rust Belt only. That's Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. The second time they've done this trial. July 23rd, the results were Trump 50% in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Biden 43%. The new poll, dated August 7th, Harris 48-47. So Biden was losing by 7 to Trump, and Harris is beating Trump by 1. The swing in a matter of 2 weeks, 8 points. And by the way, a very good job by Data for Progress, because they polled the same people about how they would be voting if it were still Biden in the campaign for the Democrats. And the wisdom of this move and the timing of this move, which will be judged, I think, by historians to be just as important as the move itself, the timing of this and the fact of this is indicated by the results of this poll, Data for Progress, in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Again, it's 48-47 Harris, and those voters said if it had been Biden running, it would be 47-42 Trump. So there is a swing right now of 6 points in favor of Kamala Harris and against Donald Trump by virtue of the presidential nominee being Kamala Harris. Marquette University Law, Wisconsin voters, likely voters, Harris 50, Trump 49, and they did about 200 different issues. These are just the highlights. Harris is seen as better on abortion policy, health care, ensuring fair and accurate elections, on Medicare, and on Social Security. Some specific questions. Does the phrase "is a strong leader" fit Harris? 50% say it fits very well or somewhat well. Does it fit Trump? 58% say it fits very well or somewhat well. So the big thing Trump has going for him, one of the two big issues, his own seeming personal strength, because America has always loved bullshit. His seeming strength is only at this point, 100 days out, an 8% advantage over a presidential candidate who's been the candidate for 2.5 weeks. Another one, does the phrase "has the right temperament to be president" fit these two characters? Well, see if you can guess how this one turned out. Does it fit Harris? 56% say you betcha. It is Wisconsin after all. Does it fit Trump? 42% say it fits very well or somewhat well. That's 42%. That is below the percentage of voters who are Republicans in Wisconsin. The favorability score in this poll in Wisconsin, Trump was at 41 before his own convention and before the assassination attempt. It has risen only to 44. His negative is 54. He's still 10 points underwater. Harris is at 41 approval, 53 disapproval. So she is just 12 underwater. She's only 2 points worse than he is, 2.5 weeks in. One more set, not so much of polls, but as of interpretation of polling and trends. This is Larry Sabato's group at the University of Virginia Center for Politics. Their crystal ball, good old-fashioned crystal ball, which has nothing to do with the former MSNBC host, Crystal Ball. Thank goodness. Crystal ball ratings changes 3 states were changed yesterday in the forecast. Georgia was lean Trump. It is now considered a toss-up. Minnesota was lean Democrat. Guess what it is now? It's now likely Democrat. New Hampshire was lean Democrat. That one has also been moved by Sabato and company to likely Democrat. And this is all before the Republicans experience when the walls come tumbling down on them. Also of interest here, remember Valentina, the gal with the AR-15 running for Secretary of State in Missouri? The one who appeared on the balcony of the Speaker of the House in violation of the rules and laws regarding the use of the Speaker of the House's balcony for political purposes? Well, guess what? She's not going to be Secretary of State in Missouri. She lost. Bad. She's not going to get it. She lost real bad. Real bad. Those fun numbers next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead of us on this edition of Countdown, somebody mentioned this guy's name yesterday. He is still in television. He rarely talks about his stint as the general manager of MSNBC because it's kind of like that 49-day term of the former UK Prime Minister Liz Truss and the way they talk about her now. Liz Truss? Liz Truss who? Oh, the woman who lost to the cabbage? That is this story. The worst general manager in the world. So bad he was compared to a character from the old Candice Bergen TV series, Murphy Brown. So bad that when it was announced they were actually going to make him the GM, that other executives at MSNBC believed that it was an elaborate practical joke. Ahead in things I promised not to tell. First, there are still more new idiots to talk about. The daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world. The bronze, worse, Olympics critics, like Trumpy, like Viktor Orban, the ones who took on the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo. Anne has been the mayor there since 2014, using language like this. I love Anne. Religious and political officials, you will recall, voiced outrage in response to the opening ceremonies. And the International Olympic Committee apologized to anybody who might have been offended because they thought it was the Last Supper being... it's a book. You don't even know if it's real. You don't even know where the Last Supper was. There's no evidence that Christ actually existed. If you want to believe it, go right ahead. Don't complain about the Olympics because you think they made fun of the story, and it wasn't even that story they were making fun of. And I am being nice. Mayor Hidalgo is not being nice. She said, using the English version of this abbreviation, F the reactionaries, F this far right, F all of those who would like to lock us into a war of all against all, said Mayor Hidalgo of Paris in an interview with Le Monde, published Tuesday, and as was noted here in one piece of wire copy, using the expletive in the original English. She said she's proud of the way the opening ceremonies presented Paris to the world. Quoting again, Paris is the city of all freedoms, the city of refuge for LGBTQI plus people, the city where people live together. F the right. I would like Mayor Hidalgo to run for mayor of New York City. I mean, we need a mayor who talks like a script from The Sopranos. Just let it all hang out, Mayor. Thank you. The runner-up? Okay, don't always let it all hang out. Take, for example, our worser today, Philadelphia radio sports reporter Howard Eskin. The headline, Howard Eskin to remain Eagles sideline reporter, according to the Philadelphia Inquirer, despite, quote, unwelcome kiss at Phillies game. Howard Eskin, who is currently banned from the stadiums at which the Philadelphia Phillies and the NBA Philadelphia 76ers play, that would be an arena in the 76ers case, will be the all sports radio station's sideline reporter for Philadelphia Eagles games, following a nearly 1 month hiatus that followed accusations he made an unwanted advance towards an Aramark employee. That's the concessionaires at the ballpark at Citizens Bank Park in Philadelphia. The advance included an unwelcome kiss in May. If you've ever seen Howard Eskin, you know how old he is? He's 206. All kisses from Howard Eskin would be described as unwelcome. Apparently this one was a little worse than normal. Have I got a story about Howard Eskin for you? When I say Howard Eskin is 206, that might be not a bad guess. Almost literally true. When I got into this business in 1979, Howard Eskin was already the sports stringer for United Press International's radio network in Philadelphia. So I would buy tape from him, as we said. He would do interviews with players after games for the Philadelphia Phillies, the Eagles, the 76ers, any other team that existed in those days. He would then feed the tape to us in New York, and he would get $15 or $25 or whatever it was. In 1980, the Philadelphia Phillies made their first World Series appearance in 30 years, the first since they had a lot of reporters covering things like the World Series. And we needed, for UPI, somebody to go and cover the World Series in Philadelphia and Kansas City, and that was me, age 21 and the third most senior sportscaster out of 3 for UPI's radio network. And my boss, Sam Rosen, was good enough to hire somebody from Philadelphia to make sure that I was okay, that there was a backup in case I missed a particular interview, to share his tape with me, to help me out in any way he could, in addition to his other personal responsibilities for his radio station in Philadelphia. And that naturally was our stringer in Philadelphia, Howard Unwelcome Kiss Eskin. I'll have to say Howard Eskin did not do a bad job. I was 21 years old and didn't have much to compare it to. Using the experience of the last 44 years, I'd say he did probably a B- job. He had a lot of stuff to do for himself. I didn't need that much help, but several times I said, I didn't get that interview with Dick Ruthven. Don't worry, I got it for you. Here's your dub. However, after the Phillies won their first World Series ever, and they had become the Philadelphia Phillies in, I believe, 1884. They moved from Worcester, Massachusetts to Philadelphia. The Phillies had never won the World Series before, so the celebration was kind of big. And in 1980, they won the World Series at home in Philadelphia with the police on horseback ringing the outfield. There must have been 50 mounted Philadelphia police officers on the field, on the warning track. God help anybody if there was a long fly ball, deep left field, as their announcer Harry Callis would have said. Thank goodness the last out was a pop-up. In any event, that's how worried they were about damage during the celebration in Philadelphia, and sure enough, there was a little damage. When we finally left the ballpark that night, about 4 a.m., on the main streets of Philadelphia, the amount of broken glass on the streets was about 2.5 inches high. Broken glass down the middle of Broad Street in Philadelphia. Howard Eskin, having been paid to take care of me, and since there weren't a lot of cabs outside Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia the night the Phillies won their first World Series because everybody was too busy breaking glass on Broad Street, Howard Eskin said, I'll give you a lift back to your hotel. And he took me halfway to my hotel, right into the middle of Broad Street, 4:25 a.m., and he said, yeah, that's as far as I go. You can get a cab from here, and basically pushed me out the door. Howard Eskin, back once again after unwelcome kiss at Phillies game. Give him something unwelcome at a Phillies game. And now to our winner. The worst. Valentina Gun Nut herself. You remember Valentina Gomez, the immigrant from Colombia running to get the Republican nomination for Secretary of State in Missouri. She's put out video fat-shaming others, kind of risky considering her own problems with the issue. She's made video after video anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ. She's made video after video carrying automatic weapons. She made the video I mentioned earlier standing on the balcony of the House of Representatives Speaker Mike Johnson, which you cannot do. You cannot campaign from that spot. Well, that issue will be put aside for a time because the Republican primary for Secretary of State in Missouri is over. And guess who didn't win? Go with Gomez. No, I'm afraid not. Let's see. Denny Hoskins, 157,118 votes, 24.4% of the vote. Shane Scholler, 108,000. Mike Carter, 91,866, 13%. Dean Plotcher, 86,600. Mary Elizabeth Coleman, 72. Howard Eskin got 60. Oh, no, I just made that part up. I don't see Valentina Gomez's name here anywhere. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whoa, wait a minute. Here she is. She finished sixth. She got 47,000 votes. She got 7 4/10% of the vote. She only missed by 110,000 votes for the Republican primary, but she did finish ahead of Jamie Corley by 1,000. Congratulations, Valentina. Valentina Gomez, who lost to Denny Hoskins, who has been sued for defamation by Denton Loudermill of Olathe, Kansas, after Hoskins shared an image of Loudermill in handcuffs and falsely identified him as an undocumented immigrant and one of the shooters at the Kansas City Chiefs parade shooting. Loudermill, Valentina Gomez, 6th place. Probably should have brought a bigger gun. Today's worst person in the world! You can get a cab from here. To the number one story on the countdown and my favorite topic, me, and things I promised not to tell. And with that Bill O'Reilly, Chris Cuomo thing in Worst Persons about that network News Nation, I was reminded that there's another guy who has a show on it. And if you have not seen this network, you are among roughly 8 billion people. It's kind of like the Nick at Night of cable news. You turn to it and 5 will get you 10 that your immediate reaction will be, I didn't know he was still alive. Anyway, it reminded me of this story about this other guy. I was a witness to the greatest management fiasco in television history, and it began on Monday, June 12, 2006. My girlfriend at the time, Katie Tur, was coming in from L.A. for a week, and my vacation had started the previous Friday at exactly 9:01 p.m. At 9:02 p.m. on that Friday night, the acting chief of MSNBC, Phil Griffin, called me insisting that even though I was on vacation, we had to meet for breakfast at 9:30 a.m. Monday. I said that made it a not vacation. And he said, we will give you 2 additional days off later. Something is happening you need to know about first. I sighed. The previous Wednesday, they had fired the president of MSNBC, the one who had once chased me around our offices in Secaucus, New Jersey, threatening to kill me because he was squeamish about blood. See if that makes any logical sense to you. He threatened to kill me because he was squeamish about blood. Jeff Zucker, then the president of NBC, had called my agent and asked how my relationship with the aforementioned acting chief, Phil Griffin, was. It was obvious they were going to put Griffin in charge, and as the marquee anchor on the network, they needed me to find it out from them rather than from a gossip site or something. I could not begrudge them the courtesy. So, on the first weekday of my vacation, Griffin and I met for breakfast, and as soon as coffee arrived, he said, listen, buddy, I'm going to be the executive in charge of MSNBC, but I'm going to be staying here in the city to oversee the Today Show, so MSNBC will also have a general manager, and the general manager will be in charge in Secaucus, and the new general manager will be Dan Abrams. Well, I paused for a second and then burst into laughter. I mean, 30 seconds of a riotous belly laugh. Loud enough that other people at the restaurant at Norma's in the Parker Meridian in New York City turned around to look at me to find out what was so funny. Then I composed myself. Then I laughed again. then a third laugh, then a fourth laugh. Oh, my God, Phil, that is the best. You get me to get up early on the first day of my vacation, and you hit me with that. Dan Abrams running something. We've known each other, what, Phil? 25 years next month? That is the best joke you have ever told me. Dan Abrams. And I laughed again for another 30 seconds, and one of my friends who was a waiter there came over and said, "Everything okay?" Because Phil could never interrupt anybody who was praising him, he smiled back at me, and when I finally stopped laughing, he said, well, thanks, I guess, but I'm serious. We've been talking to Dan for several months about this, and he just has the kind of analytical mind that... It had taken me more than a minute to realize Griffin was serious, that he and the president of NBC News, Steve Kappas, and that president of NBC, Jeff Zucker, had actually decided to take the host of our 9 p.m. show, which had been devoted for years to excruciating, lowest common denominator, tabloid crap coverage of the missing white woman of the week, to take a man who had the respect of absolutely no one on air or off at MSNBC, a man who made me, in that regard, look like St. Francis of Assisi, a man who had only been in television for 12 years, a man who had never run anything in his life, a man with indescribably bad hair that none of us could identify. Was it a toupee? Was it a weave? Was he hit by lightning? And that was the most sincere thing about him, his hair. They had actually decided to appoint this gossip monger with no experience to run a network that was just now finally establishing itself as a factor in American political media. Christ, Phil, what are you thinking? I said to him. He's a buffoon. I'd rather work for Joe Scarborough. He's condescending. He insults his producers. He insults our producers. He leaks constantly to the reporters and the gossip blogs. Half of his exclusive sources turn out to be wrong. And I might be the best friend he has there. Phil Griffin chugged his coffee. Well, I'm sorry about that. I mean, it's not going to make any practical difference for you. You and Countdown will report directly to me. Dan isn't going to have any responsibilities for any of the primetime shows. He's only going to be hands-on with the daytime shows, but he'll be the general manager of the network, and we think he has a lot of exciting ideas. And I said, exciting ideas? About what? Exciting ideas about Jean-Benet Ramsey? Phil, we have just stopped being the running joke, the bottomless punchline of cable news. And once this gets out, we will be less respected than we were a year ago. I paused, and the news bounced off the walls of the restaurant and hit me afresh again. Dan Abrams, general manager of MSNBC? He will get you fired, Phil. I don't know if he will get you fired because he's trying to get you fired, or he'll get you fired because he'll be so bad at this that everybody will quit. But you've just committed professional suicide, you and Kappas and Zucker, dead men walking. Phil Griffin was now red. I had only previously seen him red when he was very, very drunk and we were in our 20s. I was hoping you'd give him a chance. And I said some very pleasant things about giving him a chance to destroy what we had been building up for the last year. And did Phil remember that my contract was up in 6 months and CNN was already publicly courting me to go there? I said, I'm gone. You might as well release me from the contract right now. I'm out. And then something else popped into my mind. Oh, and listen, did you think there might be a problem because he and I dated the same woman 9 years ago and he told her she'd be making a mistake to get involved with me? Phil's eyes widened. He had forgotten. Like I said, he'll have nothing to do with Countdown. An hour later, my home phone rang, and it was Dan Abrams. I just wanted to say how much I'm looking forward to working with you on Countdown. As time goes by, Phil will be more and more overwhelmed at the Today Show, and I'll be making the day-to-day decisions. I'll be your guy. After a few minutes of this, which I swear I could hear his phone scratching against his toupee, and during which I said nothing but, my home phone rang again, and it was the NBC president, Jeff Zucker. So you guys report to Dan, and if you need to go further, you can go to Phil. And I said, Phil had just told me Abrams would have nothing to do with Countdown, and I intended to make sure that was true. Zucker, showing the loyalty and consistency that was so publicly displayed in the original Chris Cuomo CNN fiasco, immediately said, well, if this doesn't work, F Dan Abrams. Hell, F Phil Griffin. You come to me. The first thing I had done when I had gotten home was to call my executive producer, Izzy Povich. She had been as fascinated as I had been as to why I had to have a business breakfast on day one of a vacation. Well, I sighed, you'll never believe who the new general manager of MSNBC is. She guessed Phil Griffin, then me, and then the manager of the New York Yankees, Joe Torre. I said all would have been better choices. I said, it's Dan Abrams. She laughed so hard I had to pull the phone away from my ear. After she finally calmed down, Izzy said, oh, you had me going. Oh, my God, what a disaster that would be. I'm sorry, I fell into the bit. Yeah, just kidding. She laughed again. No, actually, I'm not kidding. She laughed again and said, come on. And so I said, yeah, I'm kidding. She laughed again. No, actually, I'm not kidding. Dan Abrams is the new general manager. She laughed again. We must have done this for 2 or 3 minutes. It was an old Eddie Izzard bit. I stole it from him about the death of Engelbert Humperdinck. I finally stopped when she said, wait, I saw Dan Abrams getting out of his car in the president's parking space this morning. You're not kidding. Oh my God, I have to call my husband and tell him I'm quitting. Well, it all worked out about as well as I had predicted. At his first meeting with the producers, Dan Abrams revealed his first exciting idea. He had apparently been given enough lead time about his appointment to have made up giant banners containing the new MSNBC network slogan, which he had dreamed up. The banners, he told the producers, were going to be hung around the studios, and in fact were being hung around the studios as they spoke, and behind him there was one covered in a drape cloth, and he pulled the string, the cloth fell off, revealing his first exciting idea, the new network slogan, MSNBC, keeping it real. Keepin', Keeipin apostrophe, no G, keepin'. That was the highlight of his tenure as the general manager. The blowback against his appointment was so universal, nobody tried to hide it. Abrams' first move was to cancel a show hosted by an ex-Fox News walking malaprop artist named Rita Cosby. She almost took hostages. Abrams delayed the meeting to tell her staff from noon until 6 p.m. Abrams then gave an interview about his vision for MSNBC and told the reporter, quote, documentaries are our most important programs, and the staffs of the uncanceled primetime shows, mine included, nearly walked out because, in fact, we were our most important programs. While Griffin prevented that mass resignation by swearing Abrams had been misquoted, Abrams then launched a series of radio commercials for MSNBC documentaries. Abrams tried to get a producer named Bill Wolf, who had been told he was going to be the new general manager, to instead host his own show. He told me he had figured out the perfect guest host for Countdown and was already in negotiations with him, Dan Rather. My girlfriend Katie's father then chimed in with a new nickname for Abrams that spread across the television industry, Miles. Miles, as in Miles, the boy producer from the sitcom Murphy Brown. I even felt sorry for him. It was that bad. And, of course, I was promptly repaid for this mistake. A week after Abrams was hired, the cable news blogger named Brian Stelter, who inexplicably wound up first at the New York Times and then at CNN, and you heard about him getting fired over the summer, Brian Stelter called to say he had been told by a source at NBC that I had just been fired at a meeting an hour before by Abrams and an NBC executive named Randy Falco. In fact, Abrams was at a meeting with Zucker and the NBC News president Kappas as they desperately tried to steer out of the fatal skid they had all swerved into. Phil Griffin was furious. Griffin told me he suspected Abrams had been somehow connected to this leak about this fake story about me getting fired, and he began an investigation of him and never trusted him again. 1 week, appointed Monday, and a lame duck the following Monday. Keeping it real. Keeping. On August 9th, 3 days shy of the 2 months mark, Phil Griffin called my office an hour and a half before my show. Okay, you want to say I told you so? We've made it clear to Dan that he won't be involved in any major decisions going forward. He will remain general manager, but I'm running everything. In a year or so, buddy, we'll say he found out he just had to go back on the air, and he'll resign, and we'll give him the 9 p.m. show, probably. You have to keep this confidential. I did. I'm surprisingly good at that, at least till I started this podcast. 14 months later, they offed him, by which time I had already started to lobby them to make the 9 p.m. host not Dan Abrams, but Rachel Maddow. They finally gave in to that in September 2008, and Dan did not have a show or a title, and he finally got the message, and he left NBC in 2011. The last I had heard of Dan Abrams before the News Nation retirement home, he had launched a new website. It's called Whiskey Raiders because it rates various brands of whiskey. You get it? Raiders, raters. You get it? It's a pun. Presumably, he chose that pun because somebody else had already taken Keeping It Real. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening, and sorry again for the continuing brevity and raggedness. Powering through here with the bad throat, as the kids say. Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, musical directors of Countdown, arranged, produced, and performed most of the music. Mr. Chanel handled the orchestration and the keyboards. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, the bass, and the drums. Produced by TKO Brothers. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. Speaking of music, my announcer today was my friend, the one and only Stevie Van Zandt. Everything else was pretty much my fault. That's Countdown for this, the 90th day until the 2024 presidential election, the 1,309th day since convicted felon Draft Dodger J. Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Thanks for reminding me about all that, J.V. Vance. Use the September 18th sentencing hearing. Use the mental health system. You've got it, President Biden. Use presidential immunity to stop him from doing it again while we still can. And anti-Semitic, anti-immigration, psychotic Republicans, please stop shooting at Trump. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Bulletins as the news requires and the voice permits. Until the next one, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.